Hello and welcome to Josh Coleman's podcast, a place to have inspired conversation with interesting people. Hi everyone. I'm really quite excited about releasing this episode with close friend and someone who I consider a teacher to me, Shahar Rabi. He is an assistant professor at Adler University and the former clinical program director at the Orchard Recovery Center on Bowen Island. We get into some pretty intense topics about 10 to 15 minutes in, and some of it may be challenging for people, but let's see if we can keep our hearts open as we listen to what this man has to say and where it might be able to take us. There's also a new section at the back of this episode. It'll be an outro with an email address in which you can email a question to Shahar and future podcasters, and then we'll do a follow-up episode in order to address those questions. Hello, Shahar. Nice to have you here, man.
Good to be here, Josh.
Yeah, cool. As we get started in this interview, I think it's going to be, again, a bit of a free-form conversation. We know each other quite well. We've talked about 1,000 things throughout time, so I'm curious to see kind of what direction the whole thing goes. But I just wanted to address something right from the start, and that's that as we were both getting ready for this, we acknowledged that you and I can both feel a bit rigid as we start to have interviews. And yeah, and I think that's a really common thing for people too, right? Because we're kind of on the spot.
Yeah, I also, first of all, congratulations on this new podcast, and I hope it goes well.
Thank you.
I think you're a very special person, and you always come open to this conversation. I feel like, I don't know, it's an interesting thing. Like, suddenly you're on the spot, but it's not only that. It's how do I find that buoyancy and dynamic energy that I really want to bring to the conversation without getting too heady? And I think that's what could happen. How do I really stay in my body and I pay attention to you and to me and make it alive, that people can feel? Because for me, I think I want people to feel as much as they can who I am and not what I pretend to be. That's
amazing. And it's funny because during the courses that I took of yours and during the interactions we've had, you've always come back to that, Shahar, and that's what I think makes you such a great teacher or leader, is because you're constantly honest about where you're at and why you're at and all those things. That's the thing that I think is the coolest part about you, to be honest.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, like for example, I met you, Shahar. What year was it? It was here in Nova Scotia. You and your wife Saskia were running courses here with the New Earth Institute you had made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 9 years ago.
9 years ago. Ooh, that wasn't yesterday. And I know you had like a very large impact on a lot of people here because you were bringing something that was different than what other people were offering. It was more alive, as you said. It was more present. It was something that wasn't just a theoretical thing. It was a very embodied, experiential thing that we all went through together. Can I just ask, basically, what was your intentions when you were doing those courses?
Well, okay. First of all, I think it speaks very much of the community that came together and the unique people that are part of this journey, and the openness of the community that I met in Nova Scotia. People were open, they were ready. There's this humility and curiosity that I really loved. And what happened was that I was a bit lost, and I went to this deep 2-week retreat, and from it, the New Earth Institute vision came, which we're still doing, believe it or not, 9 years later. Not as that intense. And what I wanted was to bring together the teachings I received in India from my teachers with the kind of spirituality that was present at that time, and to make it really embodied, like you said. It was experiential, experimental. Sometimes we did stuff on the fly, but it was based on a combination of the 12 steps with Tibetan Buddhism and non-duality.
That's a pretty cool cocktail.
The mixture. Yeah, it was a cool mixture, and I think Saskia, my wife, wrote the text, and I was one of the teachers, and what we wanted to do is have people have a genuine, direct taste of their true nature. And and what was so exciting was the premise that people can actually get that in a short period of time. Doesn't mean that it's stabilized, doesn't mean that it's all the time, but my motivation was to save people many, many years of going into random directions, trying to get what is so simple and so immediate.
Well, I think that's what you did for me with those courses. I really honestly, when I think back to where I was before those courses and what happened, the integration of knowledge and the embodiment of presence that came from those courses, I think you did that very thing for me. So your intention has been fulfilled.
And again, it wasn't more than that. It's interesting. Every time I was trying to bring a different piece to the course, I felt the resistance of the participants. There was this really unspoken commitment or a mandate that was given to me to only teach that piece at that time. Yeah. And it was interesting that's really what the space wanted. And since then, and before that, but since then, I know this way of viewing ourselves is way more popularized, and there's way more access to this kind of teaching than it was true. 10 years ago.
Yeah, things have changed drastically. I remember, It's funny you mentioned the resistance. I remember that when you were doing the group therapy sessions, I'm just going to call it that, but the group expression sessions, there were times where it got heavy as fuck in there, man. And then as everyone just said their piece and kept going around in circle and around in circle, and then something would snap and the whole room would feel like we lightened up. I don't want to use the word enlightened, but it was like something was lightened in the room, and whatever issue we were talking about suddenly felt, I don't know about resolved, but less heavy. And I remember thinking, this guy's a friggin' magician. Like, I've never seen anyone do that before. And so being in that room was a big thing for me. Just to see you doing that, or just to experience you doing that, really gave me an understanding that was possible, if that makes sense.
And I think that the teaching was very simple. The teaching was, we don't have to change any content of our mind. Whatever is arising, if we just truly stay with it and keep it alive and have an intimate relationship. I know it sounds a bit silly, but like with the content of our mind, it moves. It moves and it resolves and it does what it does best. And I think that's what people were experiencing. We're like, what? Like, I don't have to do anything about this anger and this like messed up experience and this guilt and this shame, and it just kind of resolved itself. I think that was really surprising.
Well, it's funny because I actually have some notes written down here on some of the stuff that I learned from you or that you were teaching then. And one of them was that there were 3 things that we do when an energy or a mentality or an emotion comes up, and that's that we either avoid it, indulge it, or try to transform it. And Buddhism teaches avoid and indulge. It teaches that part, but the trying to transform, the trying to fix, the trying to remedy is something I'd never heard before. And that's what you're saying, is you got people to just be with it. It wasn't about trying to use white light to make everything change. It was about fucking face this now. Like,
yeah, which really makes it brings the kind of the psychology and the spirituality, can be experienced as different domains at once. Like the psychology of being with what is and the spirituality of being what is really met at that place. That's and right. It wasn't just some sort of like flaky be with what is. It's actually the uncomfortableness, the agitated, the guilt-driven discomfort of being with what is.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is what we really try to move away from usually.
Yeah, exactly. Well, again, thank you for that, because
no worries.
That skill set has also transferred over into many other areas. And as a person who does teaching and healing work, it's much easier, of course, for me to hold space for people to be exactly where they're at in that same way. It's funny because the next thing I actually have on this list is meeting people where they're at. Because there's 2 things actually you said. One of them was that if you had a flower, would you yell at it to grow, or would you provide water and sunlight and space, and that was something that I was yelling at people to grow for fucking sure up until that moment. That was a really big thing for me. I never thought that way. And then the other thing is say on the same vein, you said if a person is really in their belief, they're not going to care what you have to say. Like that's just the way it works. But everybody will eventually experience a moment of doubt. And if you can set yourself up to be close with somebody and just wait for that moment of doubt, that's when it's time to bring new information or to bring something that might be helpful to that person.
Yeah, and I think, it's interesting when you say that, I get a bit teary, because it brings, it's silly because I probably said that many years ago, but the quality of of empathy, of that, radical honesty can be a beautiful thing, but it can be profoundly cruel if somebody is not ready for that.
Yes.
And overwhelming people with love or honesty or truth or light, could be a spiritual agenda.
Yes.
that is not only unfair, really provokes shame sometimes and cruelty. Like if the person can't handle it, then what are we doing? Right? So having the empathy, aligning ourselves with the person's container, and is much more a subtle work than just being like light, love. People can't handle that. And I think one of the pieces that I'm writing about right now in my book is about how we're shaming and blaming people to stop being racist or to align themselves with the way we see the world, and how we constantly seem to be surprised that people say no. And in fact, the more that we do that, we don't. It's hard for us to see get to the conclusion that the more we push, the more we're actually seeing the pendulum going the other way, and we're seeing more ethnocentric perspectives, more fascism, and more Donald Trumpism all over the world, because nobody likes to be pushed to change. That's not how development works. It just doesn't.
I personally very much agree with that. And so there's times where people that I'm supposed to hate, and I don't agree with them, for goodness sakes. You don't agree with somebody being racist, but I try very hard to be present with people that are like that in order to see if there's that opening, in order to really truly help them grow. Can I ask you, if you were to suggest to folks that get triggered, and rightfully so, when people are racist or when people are ignorant or bigoted in some sense, how would you suggest that they handle that situation?
Well, one of the things I do in university, I teach counseling psychology, is that I show videos of Trump supporters to my students.
Oh my God, that's confronting.
And they hate me for that. And then I ask them to now play the role of that person and be the therapist.
Okay.
So then they have to be the therapist of these people who support Trump, and maybe have points of view that the students don't agree with. But what I'm trying to train the students is to have empathy, is to see the nugget of truth in each and every perspective, no matter how radical and different and unpleasant that perspective is. Because if you bear it down to the minimum, there is a truth. It could be a need-based truth, like I need to feel safe. There could be an emotional truth, I'm scared. There could be a truth that has to do with the dialectics of life, where too much openness without containment might overwhelm people. And so there's a lot of layers. I don't want to go into deep there, but there's a lot of layers that we can find when we get curious about a perspective we don't agree with. And as we peel away the worldview that the person holds, we find the nugget of truth in the person's humanity. And I feel like the conversation we're having right now is like a conversation around the waves, and we're missing the depth of the person. I'll say it differently, we miss the person in their operating system.
That makes sense, yeah.
You know what I mean? And an operating system can be upgraded. But the hardware of us as a divine entity, that we share.
This is really interesting, just because racism is the specific topic on this one.
Sure.
You are a person of color,
Yeah.
and you come from Israel, correct?
Yeah.
What does it feel like? And I'm actually saying this for, I want to talk about this for empathy towards the people that are listening who might be like, wow, that is radical. What does it feel like when people are racist towards you? Like, how do you handle that when it becomes personal?
Okay, so it happened a few times, and I know people might not understand this, but what I see is the person's operating system. So, and I can understand the language of that.
Well, I mean, you're the perfect person to be writing this book then, because of your experiences,
you know what I mean? Like,
too, right? Yeah.
It's like code. It's a code. And we're all running a code. I'm running a code right now. This is not me being authentic and spontaneous. This is me running a specific operating system. And in it, I might develop some applications, but the operating system is not mine.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Right? So even I, in my spontaneity, I'm not truly spontaneous. Maybe there's moments of insights between me and you. So we're all up in these beautiful operating systems, all arising from the divine, from the evolutionary impulse to be better, to get more complexify. And if you can see through the operating system into the binary 0101, then there's no real threat there anymore.
I mean,
it might feel uncomfortable in my body. I'm not being flaky. I'm not saying, oh, it's just fun. No, I might feel threatened. I might feel uncomfortable in my body because I'm a mammal, and mammals want to feel safe. and I might want to, punch a person in the face or run away because that's my fight flight. But underneath that, when I step away from a situation that might be dangerous and I reflect on that, that's what actually keeps me curious.
Yeah.
Because for me, we're on a trajectory, right? And what's interesting for me is where we're heading. A racist person is where we've came from.
Yes.
So that's just a given, and that person is not going to change. Again, like we said before,
Do you have a suggestion as to how these people may change, or do you think that like a type of education or a type of empathy combined with education, like is there? So you wrote a book about it, so
yeah. Well, here's the thing: it's a 200 page book, but I think here's a few things we can do. One, we need to go back in order to move ahead. We need to actually get curious about worldview that we don't like or don't want to be part of.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two, and that's very difficult because there's an immediate, if you're not with me, you're against me.
Yeah.
There's an immediate, if you don't think like me, you're a racist. And then we pile up a lot of nuance in a black-white situation. Like if you're scared of immigrants, then you're a racist.
Yes, yeah, that's right. I mean, that's
okay. And I'm an immigrant. I'm brown. I'm bisexual. I'm Jewish, and I got a lot of things going against me here, in the context of being somebody who can get a racist reaction. But I'm also Buddhist and atheist and Christian. But
what else do you got, Shahar? What else do you got? I'm just joking.
But think about it. Instead of saying you're racist because you're afraid of immigrants, what is the need? Can I be curious about that? Can I be curious about your feeling? Can I be curious about the loss and the grief of the change that is happening in your environment? That could be very scary.
I mean, that's almost a superhero level of compassion, and I think that I'm hoping again.
But that is what is asked of us. If you actually genuinely care about evolution and creating a society that can handle the complexity and diversity that we're handling. Diversity right now, it's flat. It's let's just everybody is equal. Everybody has their own ideas, and we're going to respect each other. But if you don't think like us, then we don't include you in diversity.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well,
so that's a very limited version of diversity.
Yeah.
Another thing I want to say, and then I'll let you ask this, is looking at it from a place of principles. So we got dialectics, right? We have openness and closeness. We have depth, and we have diversity. We have hierarchy, and we have an egalitarian perspective. These are dialectics that right now are all flattened.
Yeah. And so what you're saying is we need to give like credence to our differences, not necessarily just say that we're all equal and that's like a flat sort of statement.
What I'm saying is that we need an upgraded we need an upgraded operating system. That's what I'm saying.
When you said operating system earlier, I was thinking, oh, we're due for an upgrade.
So what I'm saying is that we keep on trying to work with older operating system and create new applications. Right. And that's just not enough. We need a whole new operating system that can take the level of complexity, understand human development, and understand the divine impulse, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah. I don't want to offend anybody who's not religious, and embody that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, man.
That's a challenge of our times.
Yeah, well, that's cool, and I'm really happy that you're a person who is so passionate about this, because I do think that if even 10% of the people moved into this state that you're speaking of, that things would probably shift and heal and move quite quickly. So I really appreciate what you're saying.
It's moving because we're pushing against a wall that's not going anywhere. And we keep on pushing, and we keep getting, and the wall keeps getting closer to us.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. And the current consciousness is very confused about that. Mm-hmm. It's screaming, "We are right," and it's getting the results, the opposite results, and it's a little bit like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah.
I'm talking, I'm generalizing. Of course, there's great progress in many, many fields, and I think that's what we need. We need to get to a place of total frustration and confusion, which eventually get us to a place of curiosity, and from that, it's there. It's in the consciousness. It's just a matter of and then you're going to see ping, 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 ping. People are going to get it.
That's amazing vision, Shahar, and I'm excited to be a part of that reality as we shift into these new operating systems. It's cool because another thing, you're speaking with integrated or integral thinking, right? Spiral dynamics is something you introduced me to back in the day. And
yeah, spiral dynamics and integral theory by Ken Wilber and Don.
That's right, and it's quite obvious to me that you're speaking from that space, and it's a funny thing because most people still have the I'm right, as you said earlier, and there's only one way to think, and when people start to have that openness, as you said, that curiosity and that integrated way of thinking, I think it's quite shocking to people. Maybe some people may not even be able to see you, if you know what I mean.
I think some listeners might think I'm either profoundly flaky or maybe actually really inappropriate.
Well, I know you, and I never think that. And honestly, in my life, I feel like I come off like that towards people because of that type of love as well, that type of unconditional love that I feel in my heart for even quote unquote bad people. And I think the big difference, though, is there's a discernment between the actions that happen too. If someone is racist in their minds, for example, we're just using this as a topic, but it could be anything, and they hold a bias and they're mean by saying something mean, for example, that is fucked and it needs to be addressed. But if something becomes violent, I know that becomes a different story entirely too. And I think that's where a lot of people are reacting out of fear. To these people that are racist, is because the nervousness is that, like, history might repeat itself. They might end up being violent towards people because of their racist views. And I think that's probably where that drive of, well, fuck you comes from, if you know what I mean, because there is a fear in behind it. At the same time, again, if we're all in this together, if there's one human race that needs to go through this operating system upgrade, then we're going to have to learn to work with where each other is at as well. And that is, as I said before, almost a superhero compassion capacity. So again, I hope that the students that you're training, and that the book that you release, and that the people that you've affected by being that open and by being that radically honest and by being that empathetic, I hope that not just you, there's many people that are doing this work right now, but I hope that we will for sure accomplish this goal of a different kind of society.
Yeah, and thank you. And I also think that everything we're seeing from the you know the people demonstrating against racism and the radicalization on both sides and the resistance, that's all legitimate because it's all part of the spectrum.
Right.
Of
so that has to happen, you know, in order for us to move into these. Yeah, it's just that what I'm asking people to do who want to do or can do is take a step back and actually see the whole spectrum. Yeah. And I think what happens then is people go, oh wow, this is interesting. This has been going on for a long time, and we're still part of this this giant story of God, of an entity that is everything, that's learning about itself. Mm-hmm.
That's going. So our job is to be part of the growing and learning God, and part of that is stepping away from the journey of God into that non-dual space and say, first of all, everything's okay, and we need to do some work. but we can't do work if we're trapped into the story.
Yeah.
Then we're just part of the story. But if we step back, we can be like, look at this incredible journey.
Yeah. No, that.
And because we are at a point where the most progressive, the most advanced, the most postmodern and humanistic, I'm collapsing things here, I don't want to go too subtle, are saying we have arrived. This is the truth. This is the end. And we're not taking it to a step beyond that. Mm-hmm. That rigidity or arrogance is actually creating the counter effect that's pushing us back instead of forward.
And what I hear you saying is, in practical terms, that's just not the way to make this work. In other words, if we're thinking in a very grounded, practical way of how do we move forward, sometimes we have to take our emotions and not necessarily feed them or indulge them fully in order to step back, see what will be helpful for the long term, and then take those actions.
Yeah, and also understand that even the most progressive ideology or the most advanced worldview, the minute it starts to see itself as the end-all result, as the end game, we got a problem.
Yeah.
Because what it does, it moves from a live developmental stage into a final destination. That is what is, because then it becomes a should. It becomes a belief system. It becomes not alive anymore.
Yeah.
That's what happens. So I'm sitting in a group of students, and I have, again, I'm a visible minority, and some of the white students in the room are saying things like, I'm really scared to say what I have to say. I'm scared to ask questions. I'm scared to have my opinion. And that is a dangerous thing where a group of people don't participate anymore.
Right, yeah.
Because they're scared of retaliation.
Yeah. I do like the idea that giving voices to people who might not have had them before is really important, but I do think it would be everyone having their voice too. It wouldn't necessarily be a trade-off between.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I catch that.
It's a yes and situation, and again, every person who, regardless of your shape, race, color, gender, whatever, the minute you tell them that their curiosities, their concern, their fears is not legit anymore, all that goes into the shadow.
Become defensive as well. Yeah,
all that becomes resentment and defense and yucky stuff.
Yeah, no, that
but if a person can sit in a room and say, I'm really confused about the way I feel because I'm ambiguous about A and B, or because I'm not sure about C and D. And instead of the group saying you're a bad person, the group says, let's look at that. And not because I hold the truth and you don't, because we're still figuring things out.
Yeah, well, I wish for the world those mentalities of openness and of growing together, because what you're saying also does require the person to be vulnerable enough to say, I'm confused. And, we're coming, as you know, from a history where people had to almost have this like false sense of certainty on everything, or we die evolutionarily, right? Like just very recently, if you didn't have that certainty, someone would perhaps come and kill your whole village. So I hope that we can cultivate that safety where people can be honest, radically honest with how they're feeling, and then we can work with each other. Like if we're not doing that, Shahar, I don't really want to be here anymore. Like that's like that level of openness and understanding of each other, I think is going to be really important as the process of reformatting that operating system.
And I think you said something really important, Josh. You talked about safety. So the first step before we do anything is we need to make people feel safe.
Yeah.
Not just the minorities, not just the people who were unsafe for many, many years. That definitely.
Them as well, but yes.
Definitely. Like that, people need to feel safe and protected and grounded. Also the quote unquote bad people.
Yeah.
Also the quote unquote racist and bigots, etc. Because again, first of all, we're doing a scarecrow situation where we're putting a whole bunch of people and we're calling them a specific name, and usually people, again, like I said, people don't show up very well when they're labeled, because all their humanity collapses into a label. But secondly, people need to feel safe to actually say, I think I'm a racist, or I think I have some issues about this and that. Yeah. That is the kind of radical safety I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Where because right now, try to say something ambiguous about a hot topic on Facebook and see what happens to you.
I actually very specifically don't do that.
Oh, and guess what? You're not the only one. Because, and I'm talking to my female friends, my gender fluid friends, my male friends. People are scared shitless to put ambiguous, hot button topics, their personal ideas, or their questions, or their curiosity on Facebook, because the immediate shaming that will happen is so toxic.
I personally think that shame is an energy that really has almost no use. There must be some application at some stage of development, but I really think that shame as a basis for a change maker, as you said earlier, will have the opposite effect.
That's what's happening. Yeah. You're actually, here's what we're doing. Self-righteousness is fueling right-wing agenda. So somebody is kind of like curious, and he's young, he's a male, and he's like maybe a female, and he's like unsure about stuff, and he's like, what about this? What about that? He wants to say something, he knows that he's going to be shamed, and then he goes and does this YouTube research, and he finds all these radical right-wing agendas, and he's like, whoa, these people think like me. Interesting. Right. And then it goes on this like journey into the most, and it gets more extreme and more extreme and more extreme. But instead of that, what would happen if we would say, hey, your position, even if I don't agree with it, and I'm actually quite emotionally triggered by that, I'm going to not just like honor it, some sort of humanistic kind of belief system, because I'm actually trying to help you and me understand how can we not only respect each other's points of view, but find a way to synergize them together into something new.
Yeah, right. It's this may be a little bit off topic, but I was I was saying the other day that I feel when people overcome their toxic behaviors and we begin celebrating that, so not like actually overcoming, like going through the radical openness in one's heart to say, oh my God, like I can't believe I thought that way. I've been through all sorts of weird shit like that. And then when we go through those closed perceptions and they become open, if we start to celebrate that, if we focus on the celebration of, wow, like you flowered, like, wow, like you came into an open heart in a situation where you didn't have one before. Wow, your mind expanded. I feel like that reward system will work a lot better than the shame one. And it's a genuine reward, though, and a genuine change, you know?
But again, this is what I'm writing in my book. We don't have cultural ceremonies for that.
Yes, that's right.
Because we see what I'm saying? What's lacking, because I keep back to operating system. Operating system comes with it a whole package of stuff: ceremonies, initiations, practices, ways of thinking about stuff. All this is new. It's completely new territory. And we're not only exploring the territory, we're creating the territory. So think about that. Imagine a system, a culture, where we prioritize safety.
I can imagine it, Shahar. And again, I'm trying to create that in my own circles. I'm trying to create that in the classes that I do. I'm trying to create that in the way that I move and walk in the world. And I know that you're doing the same thing, and I know there are other people doing the same thing. And I really hope that that is going to weave together to create this big mosaic of this new culture that we're forming.
And again, you're right, because what is needed is a mosaic. It needs to be localized. It needs to be grassrooted. It cannot have a generalized leadership.
Yes.
It can't have a guru or a leader. And the whole way of thinking about tribal consciousness and the religious of tomorrow and the cultures of tomorrow have to be so much out of the box, and yet build on the profound lineages of the past.
That's
beautiful. And then transcend them into a really new way of thinking about things. Again, we don't have time to explore it, but you're right. That's what I think what makes this time really, really exciting. It's
really cool because, and just to bring things into a bit of a lighter space, I actually have a funny story to tell about an interaction that we had, I think in 2011. Sure. I made a YouTube channel. Do you remember back in the day I made a YouTube channel? Mm-hmm. And I said to you, I was like, Shahar, I really want you to give me a criticism. I want you to look at a video that I made and I want you to criticize it. And you responded back with, you were like, oh, Josh, I'm not your coach. We're friends at this point. It was after we had ended the courses that we were working with. You were like, I don't want to hurt your feelings. You were like, I don't want to say something that's going to make you feel upset with me as a friend. And I remember being like, fuck that. I want a criticism from Shahar. And I remember feeling like really kind of steamy about it and just being like, just give me a criticism. And you watched my video and you had sent back a email, I believe, or something like that. And it was like, Josh, that was a really good video. There's something I noticed, though. Part of the time, it felt like you were talking like in oneness to me. In other words, it was a transmission of presence. It was you and me were on the exact same level, the exact same space, and you were transmitting that. The other half of the time, it felt like you were the teacher. You were the person who was trying to tell me how I should be thinking or feeling. And what you said was that every leader and teacher is going to have to walk that line because, again, we are individuals and we have these complexes, and then also that presence is something we can access. And that changed my whole life, really. And I remember when I received that, I remember thinking like, I can't believe you almost withhold that shit from me because I didn't, that was still not something that I fully understood inside myself. So when you reflected that to me, and the reason that I just said that is because, like you're saying, we don't need a guru. We don't need one world new religion leader or whatever, because it's that openness and that transmission of presence between people that's actually going to fuel this thing. So I just wanted to say that again, like in my personal life, that particular piece of advice that you gave relevant to the situation ended up being enlightening, to say the least.
Wow. I'm really happy to hear that, man.
Yeah. Well, I'm just glad you said it, man. That's what I'm saying. I was like, no. I don't trust. The thing was, I don't trust everybody's opinion. I feel like a lot of people are still coming from their projected spaces. So I knew that you would be honest with me as well. I guess I'm trying to say, and I appreciate it. So Shahar, I think that we've talked at pretty strong length about what you're up to with that book and what your philosophies are here when it comes to that. And I thank you very much for sharing all that. I hope that ends up being very helpful to people who are working on the front lines trying to create change, because I do think that with that more wu-wei approach of acceptance, understanding, and then bringing through something new, that will have much better success at what we're doing. So again, thank you very much for laying that out.
And I want to thank the audiences for like holding space for that, because it's complicated and complex and could be overwhelming.
Yeah, and I have a strong feeling that some people may feel very overwhelmed, and I think other people are going to see themselves. You're a rascal. I think other people are going to see themselves in what you're saying too, and I think it's going to help people as well, even with the challenges. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
And I was going to end every episode. This is only the second one, but I was going to end every one just by saying, do you feel like we should start to wrap up in that direction? Is that cool?
Yeah. It's your show, man.
It's my show. Cool, I can say that. The question that I'm going to ask everybody is if you could just say one thing, and it's kind of like, I know you're not into catchphrases, I know you're not into summing up complex issues with one-liners, but if you could just say one thing to the world, if you could put it on a big message board that everyone could see, what would you say, or what would you give to people?
You are enough.
Could you elaborate on that any more? Could you elaborate on what you mean?
I think in the end, with all the theories we talked about and all the big changes ahead of us and yada yada yada, I think we strive to feel enough, and we strive to matter, and I think one of the most beautiful thing that happened to me in the past 10 years through therapy and having children, and it's just to know that I'm enough, and and it's a great feeling. It's a really beautiful feeling, and I want that for everyone. I think when you feel like you're enough, you can ask for what you want, and you don't have to manipulate others to fill in a hole in your heart, or you just feel enough. You feel like you just had a beautiful meal, and that it's enough. It's not perfect, and it's not complete. And I think if I, even as a therapist, when I work with people, if I can teach them that, to show them that is I think that's the most profound thing that a person can feel.
That's absolutely beautiful, and thank you so much for ending on that note. Thanks, Shahar. I love you, man.
Yeah, I love you too. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions for the podcaster today, send an email to questionjcp@gmail.com. That's questionjcp@gmail.com.